The ISA 315 update to the audit templates has required enhancement in the risk areas of risk assessment and the design and implementation of controls. This video will be looking at the risk assessment process. So as you go through the planning stage and review of the permanent documentation, you will identify risks as you go along, and you will then need to, at a later date, assess those risks. The risk dialogue is always available throughout the audit to record those risks as you go along. So at this stage, some basic fields will be available to record whether it's a financial statement risk or it's a risk at the assertion level. And the seriousness of that risk can be identified as well. All fraud risks will be regarded as significant. Now, selecting assertion also then allows the user to identify the audit area and the related assertions which are affected by it. So, for instance, we can select income, and then we can actually even further refine that by mapping, if so wished. You then select the individual assertions to which that risk relates. But the risk assessment process is an iterative one. It doesn't just end there. All the risks that you identify throughout this time will be recorded and accumulated on the risk report screen. And here they can be further refined and reviewed. Now, this update with the ISA 315 content introduces a further assessment of those risks on the new B30 document. The B30 is a summary document which is then backed up by detailed schedules where those risks are assessed. Now, this document contains a detail of guidance at the bottom of how the schedule is to be used, and the links, the references on the various boxes will refer you to the notes at the bottom. But it's split into two main areas. The first area is those where you identify risks at the financial statement level, and secondly, those which are assessed at the assertion level. So for any of those risks that we previously saw, which were identified at the financial statement level, these will be available on the drop-down to select. And then you can record further detail and the effect on the planned audit approach of those. For those risks that have been assessed at the assertion level, they will appear then in the drop-down further down. So we've already selected the revenue recognition risk. There's also and then that's already been selected. You can add further rows, and indeed we can create further risks. These, by selecting the individual risks here, you might not wish to review all risks that you've assessed, but for the ones that you do wish to assess, as soon as you've created the row here, it will be available on a further form called the B31. This is where further detail is then reviewed and recorded relating to that risk. So opening up this document brings us to a form which has been created to assess these risks in greater detail. You can jump between the various different forms by using the drop-down. So we see that information has been brought forward that we've already recorded relating to this risk. We've got what the risk is, and we've got the nature of that risk. We've also got the relevant assertions that we've identified that this risk will affect, and whether it is a fraud or significant risk. We then have a look at whether the inherent risk factors affect the susceptibility of these relevant assertions to misstatement, and those can be selected here. These are the projected risk factors that come from the ISA, but you can also record others should you need them. We then move on to the next section, which is assessing this risk of misstatement by likelihood and magnitude. This is the idea that risk falls upon a spectrum where likelihood and magnitude are the two elements to consider when you're deciding the overall inherent risk of a particular assertion and risk of material misstatement. The scoring level now is on 1 to 5 of these risks at the assertion level, 1 being low and 5 being high. And so by selecting the level of risk by assertion at magnitude level, so you could have for instance, a very low likelihood of misstatement, but a very high magnitude of misstatement, and that will then predict or suggest a score for the inherent risk overall of something fairly high. If they are both of the same, obviously they'll result in the same option, but it's simple. And also, if you happen to have a high likelihood but a low magnitude misstatement, again the suggestion will come in somewhere between the two. But these can always be overwritten if you wish to do so. You're then required to assess the control risk relating to these assertions. But you would only use this where you are going to plan to test the operating effectiveness of control as a whole. So if you're not going to do that, the answer should just be not applicable, and that will be the default position. And as a result, the residual risk of material misstatement at the assertion level will be identical to the inherent risk that you identified, that you created earlier. However, if you are going to be doing some controls testing, and we'll have a look at the controls form that will be considered in a separate video. If you are doing that, then you then may result in a mitigation to the level of risk that you are assessing. If the risk is still high, even after you've done controls, that will result in the risk of the material misstatement of being exactly the same. But if it is medium or it is low, it may well then affect the overall outcome. These are only suggested scores. Again, you can overwrite those yourself. So once that form has been completed, by then going back to the B30, you'll see that these forms have started to fill out. So for this revenue recognition risk, where we identified completeness, accuracy, and cutoff as being our assertions, we've now recorded our inherent risk related to those. We've also recorded the control risk, and we've recorded the risk of material misstatement overall. You can see for this further revenue risk, because we haven't done that yet, we've got no suggestions for these items. We'll come on to in a minute to have a look at the risk assessment screen, but first we have a second section at the bottom of this screen to do with assertion level risks relating to accounting estimates. Now, accounting estimates have been within our documentation for a little while. So these are, again, an assessment of your individual accounting estimates, and any risks here will also feed back to that B30 summary screen. So if we have a new key accounting estimate, we can again identify the affected areas. We can identify the assertions which are being considered. And this form is largely then the same as it was previously. However, we've also got a section at the end where we will assess the inherent risk at this various level. So again, it's a score of 1 to 5 for the individual assertions, and then the same issue with control risk and the final suggested risk of material misstatement at that assertion level. Again, this information will feed back now into the B30 document. And so again, that's feeding through here, and you can record the effect on the planned approach. If we go back to our risk screen and now our assessment of risk, we can see that a number of risks have been identified relating to income. These are highlighted here. Now, obviously, we've been recording likelihood of material misstatement, magnitude of misstatement, inherent risk and control risk all the way through. What we won't do at this stage is force these numbers from the assessment we've been working on into here, because there could be a lot of risk affecting one particular area. But based on that information, the user can then start to develop the individual risk of material misstatement at the individual assertion level. We'll see that if we've got some where there are no risks, those can be deselected. Where we've got these risks, we can identify and add annotations, which will take us directly to the risks which we have identified. And so we can consider these as we're going through. And so as we are then assessing and reviewing the risk at the assessment, we can review what we have already considered and fully filled out on the supporting forms. And so again, these will be suggested values based on the assessment of likelihood of misstatement and magnitude of misstatement, and similarly relating to the control risk. As we said, this is an iterative process. It doesn't stop here. Throughout the audit, we may have to revisit these risks and review them as we're going through. These risks will then be available for consideration when we consider and come to do our audit work.